Random thoughts. In this video, we are going to talk about the rise and fall of Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi. Now, this figure is often referred to as Gran or Gurey. Now, Gran is an Amharic name and Gurey is a Somali name. Now, both these names mean left-handed. So it seems like Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi was a left-handed person. Now, Imam Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi is one of the most influential figures in the history of the Horn of Africa. It's unfortunate that many people in East Africa don't know about him, but his activities or his contribution to the history of East Africa is huge. He did impact how Ethiopia in particular became what it is today, and we can say to some extent he influenced what Somalia turned out to be, and maybe to some extent Eritrea and Djibouti. So this figure that is very influential, and even after his death, he became a figure that many people learned about and sometimes admired because of what he achieved in his life. Imam Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi defeated and conquered Abyssinia, and it could be said that this is something that hardly anyone else had achieved before him. Something else that I noted as I was doing research about this person is that he achieved a lot at a very young age, and in fact he died very young. He died at the age of 37, but at that time he had achieved a lot, more than many people who live very long can ever achieve or ever achieve. Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi, or Gurey, and I'm going to call him Gurey more in the video as we move forward, was born in 1506, somewhere in what used to be known as the Adal Sultanate. Now, the Adal Sultanate is this sultanate that existed in what we can say today to be the eastern side or the northeastern side of Ethiopia, and maybe the northwest side of what we know today as Somalia, and maybe some parts of Djibouti, maybe some parts also of Eritrea. So that's where he was born. Now, about his ethnicity, there is not very clear historical records about that. There are some who say that he was an Harari, others say he was a Balo, a tribe that existed then in that part of Africa. And there are many who believe that he was a Somali. Now, there is a document that I read for this video, and it's a book that was published in 1902. It's a book that was written by two people, R.S. Whiteway and Joas Bermudez. Now, Joas Bermudez was somebody who lived during the time of Ahmad bin al-Ghazi, but Whiteway is the one who took the material that were created by Bermudez and turned it into a book that was published in 1902. Now, this book is titled The Portuguese Expedition to Abyssinia in 1541 to 1543. Now, in this document, the writers make the argument that Gurey was a Somali, and this is what they write. I'm going to quote them. They say, he was certainly not an Arab, probably he was a Somali, for we find him closely connected with many who were Somalis. So that's what is written in the book, and as I've said, this is a book that was written by two authors. One of them lived during the time of Gurey, and another one, of course, is a recent historian who picked the material that was put together by Bermudez and created for us this book. But Bermudez is an interesting character. Reading through the book, it seems like he was not a very straightforward person. Apparently he came from Goa, India. He was maybe of mixed heritage, maybe Indian and Portuguese. He seemed not to have been a very straightforward person. Seems like someone who was looking for power for himself. So we might take some of the things that are written in this document with a pinch of salt. Now, how Gurey came to power in the Adal Sultanate is also an area of his life that is not very clear. Now, according to this document, Gurey used to be a soldier of somebody else, and not only him, but also his father. And his father is a person who used to go by the name Ibrahim al-Ghazi. And his father apparently used to be a soldier of somebody who used to go by the name Garad Abun bin Adash. And this person seems like he was an emir or a governor, something of sort. But in other sources, it is said that it is Gurey's father who used to be a governor. So there's a clarification that may need to be made on that point on how he came to become a ruler of Adal. Now, according to this document that is written by, I can say, R.S. Whiteway, Gurey, he was a soldier of this person that I've mentioned, Garad. But at some point, seems like there was a rebellion in the Adal Sultanate. And this rebellion was mostly by people of Somali origin who rised up, and they were trying to remove this guy from power, sort of, or something like that. And in that process, They invited Gurey to join them, but Gurey could not betray his boss. That's what it seems, according to what is written in this document. He could not bring himself to betray his boss. So he fought alongside his boss, but unfortunately his boss seems like was killed, something like that. And when that happened, Gurey took up that role of being the general of the remaining army, and he fought these rebels and he defeated them. And after defeating them, he made them part of his army. And that's how he came to power in Adal Sultanate. At least according to this document that I've mentioned, and I need you to understand that, so we take it with a pinch of salt. Maybe other documents could say other things. Gurey, when he becomes the leader of Adal, was a young man. Very young. He was like 22, 23. He was very young, and that surprised me. And I think we live in an age where people take long to mature. Maybe that's why it surprises some of us to find out that somebody as young as 22, 23 rise through the ranks to become, we can basically say, a leader of a state at that very young age. So he was very young. He was around 22, 23 when he becomes like a leader of Adal, we can say. It's not very clear that he became an imam immediately. That's an area I'm not very clear about. Maybe somebody in the comment section can clarify for me whether he became an imam immediately or when exactly did he become an imam. Now, the time when he becomes a leader of Adal is around 1527. And then about 2 years later, he decides, or he goes to war with Ethiopia. Not Ethiopia then, it was Abyssinia then. He goes to war with Abyssinia, that was in 1529. And during that time, the person who was the emperor of Abyssinia was a guy who went by the name Lebnan Dengel. His official name was Dawit II. Now, Gurey is very successful almost immediately, and he goes to Abyssinia. He captures very critical assets in the empire. He captures the Pralibanos, most sacred monastery in Abyssinia. And then sometimes later, he captures Ambageshen, which was like the royal stronghold where the royal family used to stay in Abyssinia. Now, this took a while though. He went to Abyssinia in the year 1529, and the time he's capturing Ambagashen, this is like 1539. That's like 9 years later. So this is a war that went on for a while. In 1540, Dawit II dies, and he dies while Gurey has basically captured, we can say primarily the entire of Abyssinia except some few pockets here and there. And he's converting people to Islam. And during this time that Dawit II dies, and he dies while he's on the run, of course, and he's hiding from Gurey, and he dies, he's with his family. Now, when he dies, one of his sons becomes the next emperor, which was like just symbolic because he was not controlling anything really. This young emperor hides somewhere in Shoa with his mother and a few followers or supporters, while the rest of Abyssinia is basically under Gurey. Now, the young emperor who took over after the death of Dawit II is a guy who went by the name Galaud de Was. As the war goes on, Gurey manages to capture some of the members of the royal families, including one of the sons of Dawit II, and this is the son who went by the name Mainas. Now, Mainas is captured and taken by Gurey. Now, the wife of Gurey plays a very critical role in preserving Mainas, because Mainas was going to be killed, basically. But the wife of Gurey, who is portrayed in this document as a very compassionate woman, a woman who had a very caring heart, and her husband did listen to her a lot. That's what the document says. So this woman talks to the husband, Gurey, and the husband spares Mainas. And in fact, he takes care of Mainas. And at some point, Mainas goes back to Abyssinia and he becomes an emperor himself. During this time, maybe we can say from 1530 to 1540, Abyssinia is basically part of the Adal Sultanate, and Gurey is the ruler of this region. And most Abyssinians have converted to Islam. There are a few pockets of Christianity here and there still going, and then there are Jews here and there practicing, but for the most part, most people have converted to Islam. In 1535, before we reach 1540, this guy who is now the source of this document that I wrote, Bermudez, is called by Dawit II before he dies. He invites him to wherever he was hiding, and he sends him to Portugal and to Vatican to ask for assistance. And as I've said, this Bermudez guy seems to me was a very crafty guy, the way he's portrayed or the way he explains history. So he goes to Vatican and he talks to the Pope, apparently, and somehow he manages to have himself be appointed to be a patriarch or some position in the Church of Ethiopia, basically like a representative of the church. And then he goes to Portugal, of course, and he talks to the Portuguese about the situation in Abyssinia. And the Portuguese from Lisbon sent a message to India, because at that time seems like the Indian office was in charge of everything going on in East Africa. And it's from there that things are handled. During this time, the governor of Portuguese India is a guy who went by the name Estevão da Gama. Now, Estevão da Gama is the second son of Vasco da Gama, who many of us are very aware of. Now, Estevão is the governor, and Estevão comes to the Red Sea and to some extent to the Mediterranean Sea, but most likely the Red Sea, to Egypt around there. And he comes with his brother, and his brother's name was Cristóvão da Gama. Now, he comes with his younger brother, and they reach there, and he gives him instruction to go to Abyssinia and try to rescue the emperor there. And so Cristóvão starts trekking inland to Abyssinia, and with him he has like 400 Portuguese soldiers. This is now in the early 1540s. That's when Cristóvão arrives in Abyssinia and is trekking inland, going southward. And there were two options for him: either go until they meet the emperor, the Abyssinian emperor, and then they join forces to go after Gurey, or he attacks Gurey by himself. And he decides to do the latter, which was a big mistake. He decides he was going to attack Gurey, and he doesn't attack Gurey directly, immediately at least. What he does, he finds a camp of Gurey soldiers somewhere, and he decides to attack them. And there was advice from some Abyssinians who were with him that perhaps they shouldn't attack them yet. They should just bypass them and go first meet the emperor before coming for them. But he decides he wants to attack them, and of course he attacks the camp and he overruns it. But now, the mistake is the message reaches Gurey that the Portuguese are here. Gurey engages Cristóvão, and they do fight in several battles. Now, the final one was on August 30th, 1542. Now, this time, Cristóvão is surrounded and cornered, and he loses many of his soldiers, and several of his soldiers escape. And then he hides in a bush. There is a story that he was betrayed by a woman. That's a story that is also told. But the general story is that he went and hid in a bush. And then, of course, at night, Gurey's soldiers came and found him and captured him. And then they took him to Gurey, and Gurey tortured him apparently, and then executed him. Now, this is where now Gurey makes his own mistakes. This is where he makes a major blunder. After executing Cristóvão da Gama, Gurey thinks or believes that he has basically destroyed the enemy, and they were not going to rise again against him. And what he doesn't realize, close to 100 Portuguese had escaped, and in fact close to 150. And those who escaped, most of them went to go and meet the emperor of Abyssinia then, who was waiting for them. And others, like maybe 50, they escaped towards the coast. So he abandons going after them, or he doesn't decide to go after them. He decides that they are basically crushed. Not pursuing them is not even the mistake, the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake is that he dismisses some of the Turkish soldiers who are with him, because he was so sure of himself that whatever was remaining here, he could handle himself. So he sends them away. Now, of course, the 100 Portuguese, or about that number, they reach the Abyssinian emperor and they join him, and they start strategizing on how to come back. They come and face Gurey, and the final battle is fought on 21st February 1543, according to this document that I read. And they had a major battle somewhere to the south of what was Abyssinia then. And that battle goes on for a while, and at some point, Gurey is becoming overwhelmed, and he decides to go to the front and try, of course, to encourage his soldiers to fight. And it is during this time that one Portuguese soldier, who is named as John the Galician, took a shot at him and hit him on the chest. And Gurey was seen riding out of the battlefield on his horse, and then he fell down and he died not long after that. Now, the death of Gurey basically marked the beginning of the end of the Adal Sultanate. Most of the Portuguese soldiers who survived, it is said that they never left Ethiopia. They never left Abyssinia. Most of them married local women and basically became locals. Let me say something about Gurey's wife. The wife went by the name Bati del Wanbara. Now, this lady, as I've said, was very compassionate, and many Abyssinians were not executed because of her. She will talk to the husband like, don't execute that one, just let them live. And that included, of course, as I've mentioned, the son of Dawit II, who survived minors and in the end became an emperor himself. When the husband died, the Adal soldiers, of course, protected her. She basically was a companion of Gurey for the most of their marriage life. She always accompanied him even to the battlefields. So when he was killed, they took her back to Adal. And when she went back to Adal, apparently she later on married someone else who became sort of a ruler of Adal. And then she asked him to avenge the death of her first husband, and that happened. Apparently, that's how Galaudeus ended up being executed himself later on. Those are my random thoughts.